Hi, my name is Uri Gurevitz. I'm the Director of Market Insights and Strategy at Amdocs, and today I'll be talking about the new world of customer experience. So hi everyone, my name is Uri, and I'll be talking about the new world of customer experience. And I'll be sharing some results from a big survey, consumer survey that we ran, a global survey which we call the Customer Experience Spotlight. And we'll see what consumers say about some of the issues we've talked about, how it differs from country to country, ages, etc. So let's just start with focusing on telcos first. And talking about how in the past service providers had a few main assets. So it was obviously the customers and the networks and the devices and the services, the digital content, music, TV services, etc. We see that traditionally they were fighting and competing between themselves over these services. Then, a few years ago, we saw some of the over-the-tops come in and start kind of biting and grabbing some of the services that traditionally belong to the service providers. So like the messaging services, like voice in some cases with Skype, now with WhatsApp, who started offering voice calls, obviously the music services, the TV services, etc. So it was still a battle for services between the traditional service providers fighting and competing amongst themselves together with these over-the-tops. Who did not have, obviously, the networks, and do not have the networks just yet, and obviously the customers. What we see how this evolved even further in terms of customer experience, and that's really what we call the battle of experience. So it's not just the battle for services anymore, it's the battle of experience. And what do I mean by that? We talk about the fact that we as consumers today experience different experiences in different industries with different types of service providers. And once we get used to a certain experience, we expect to get the same experience in other industries as well. So, I mean, we have on the outer circle here a few examples of some, leading experience providers in other industries. So we all kind of know the Amazon example, Uber, who's, everyone's been talking about in the last year. But think of it from the consumer's point of view. If today I can order a taxi through the application in seconds and get information on who the driver is and see reviews about him, know exactly when they're going to pick me up in the exact minute or so, and then I call my cable company and ask for a technician to come and sort out some problem I have at home, and I get an answer that the technician will be over in 2 weeks, and they'll come between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., kind of in a four-hour window. That's just not good enough from the consumer's point of view. So obviously, we're not saying that the consumer would expect the technician to be over in seconds, like the Uber example. But still, we as consumers today are getting more and more used to different experiences in other industries. And the fact that it is in another industry does not matter for us as consumers, because we would expect the same thing from our service providers or from any other provider who's giving us any type of service. Another example, KLM. Airline, nothing to do necessarily with service providers, communication service providers, yet when you go to their service and support methodology and their techniques, they offer, as we've talked about before, any channel or multi-channel approach. You go to their website or their different channels, and they will tell you how long it would be for them to respond to you via that channel in real time. So something like, we got used to calling the call center in service providers or other providers today and hearing that, you're number 20 in the queue, or you will be answered in 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever the time is. They do it under other channels as well. So there's a barometer that shows you that if you post a question now on Facebook, you will get an answer right now in 20 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 15 minutes. The same if you send them a tweet with a question, how long it would take them right now in real time to get an answer. So again, we as customers, get used to the fact that we can get real-time information on how long it would take for the provider, the service provider, to respond to us. And we would want to get that in other industries as well. So like service providers, who, as we said, do it in many cases on the call center side, but not in the other channels. So all we're saying here is that this is all kind of changing, and customer experience now is not just very siloed in the different industries. It's not just a matter of comparing the AT&T customer experience to the Verizon customer experience, but it's what we experience in our everyday life in other industries as well. And we could go on and talk about the different examples. Obviously, the Apple example with redesigning their store and the experience stores, which we've heard. We've seen many of the service providers try to follow and transform their stores. We've heard a bit about the Orange transformation of the stores, etc. So obviously, everyone's learning from the other industries here as well. We've seen some of these similar numbers, so I guess I'll skip that. And I'll talk a bit about the customer experience spotlight and some of the interesting questions we saw from the survey, which we've kind of touched a few of these points earlier, and we can look at some of the data. So we started by asking customers, first of all, if the companies like Google, like Amazon, like Facebook, if they were to offer you today connectivity, would you consider switching over, leaving your current traditional service provider and switching over to one of these companies? What we saw was that 80% of respondents said they would not be willing to switch over. 20% said they would be willing to switch over to the Amazon, Google, Facebook for connectivity. The main reasons for not switching, as you can see on the right, were mainly the privacy and distrust reasons. So, I don't trust these companies. They have a lot of information about me anyway. I don't want to add more services that I'm getting or I'm using from these type of companies, especially, Amazon and especially Google and Facebook, which have, different discussions around privacy and trust issues anyway. And there's also the second reason about internet quality. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be getting from them. I know what I'm getting today, what type of network quality I'm getting from my current service provider. I just don't know what I'll be getting from these other companies that you mentioned here. I guess this is a good news, bad news story. So you can look at the 80% and say we have 80% of customers that are, would be loyal to the traditional service providers and would not be willing to switch over to these other, giants. On the other hand, you can also look at the half-empty glass and say, still, about a fifth of your customers would consider switching over. And this is obviously without knowing exactly, it's a hypothetical question or almost a hypothetical question. You don't know exactly what these companies will be offering you, what type of network, what type of prices, what type of bundles, etc. And yet still a fifth of your customers would be willing to switch over. Second question, and then we'll kind of put these two questions together because it was also interesting to note some of the differences from country to country. Second question was along the lines of the NPS, or at least similar to that, where we started asking questions about would you recommend your current service? And there you see an average of 63%, which was actually, again, a pretty high average, global average. When we asked why would you recommend the current service to your friends and family, and again, this is telco specific, we saw that customer care and experience was the #1 answer by far on the global level. You can see about 90%, followed by the network quality. Again, we see how important that is, followed by prices, and followed by brand reputation. Obviously, big differences here in these four answers between the different countries. So in some of the countries that are more cost conscious, obviously the competitive prices was much higher. I think in none of the countries it was actually the #1 answer, but it got very close to the customer experience. So I think it was around 80% in some of the developing APAC countries, etc. Now let's put the question about the Google, Amazon, Facebook, and the question here on top, would you recommend your current service provider? Let's look at it on the country level, and let's plot them together on the graph here, and hopefully it's not too complicated. I'll just spend a minute explaining it, because I think that the results that came out of it were very clear, and it's worth just spending a minute on. So on the y-axis, what you see is the question on would you recommend your current service provider to your friends and family? You can see here this was the global average, the 63%. So anyone who's above here, above the 63 is obviously above the global average, and anything below here is below the global average. Okay, so that's this axis. If we look at this axis, this is the question about would you consider switching over to your the Google, Amazon, Facebook connectivity? Again, you can see the global average of 20%. Anyone above here, the more customers said that they would actually switch over. Anyone below the 20%, below the average. What's interesting, obviously, to note is, and we did this survey, it was across, I think, 17 different countries, as you can see, in all different regions. And I think this clearly showed, once we plotted the numbers here, it clearly showed a big difference between the countries here, which were the developing APAC, so the Philippines, India, Thailand, South America, Brazil, Mexico, and Eastern Europe, Hungary, Czech Republic, Romania, and Russia. So all these countries, as you can see, customers are less loyal to them, to their service providers. So they're less willing to recommend compared to the global average, as well as more willing to switch over. And you can see India was actually the country with the highest number, where about 32%, I think the number was, 32% of customers said they would be willing to switch over to Google, Amazon, Facebook, which you can see much higher than the global average of 20%. On the other hand, you have the countries here. So we have North America, which was US and Canada, and we have Western Europe, Netherlands, Spain, UK, Germany, Italy, and we have developed APAC, Singapore here, all fall here, where customers are more loyal to their service providers. They're less willing to switch over to Amazon, Google, Facebook, as well as more willing to recommend. So you can see a very clear distinction between the different regions and different countries in the world. Another point, and this kind of brings us to the millennial questions, what we also saw, we asked customers, how long have you been with your current service provider? What you see is when we split that up according to the different ages, you can see that the younger customers were in the less than 1 year time frame with their current service provider. And you can see it's more than the others. I think that the average was about 50%, as you can probably see from the results here. The average was 49 or 50% on the global level. But you can see that the younger customers are less loyal. They have less loyalty. So if in the previous slide we looked at the country and the regional differences, here you kind of see that there's also the age factor here. To add to that, on a different question there, we asked, are you willing to, in terms of spend on different services, and these were mostly around the over-the-top services, so it was mostly around music services and TV services and things like that. We saw that the younger customers are willing to pay more compared to the previous year, or are paying more compared to the previous year. So again, these are not, huge. I mean, we talked before that the millennials or the younger people have less money to spend. So first of all, we are talking here about the 18 plus. So it's people who have, some money, are either in school or finished school and are working already, etc. And on the other hand, we're not talking about huge amounts of money here. And if you subscribe to a music service or something like that, it's not a huge sum of money that you're spending. Yet we see that they're spending more money on these type of additional services compared to some of the other ages. So we see that the millennials in the discussion of should we treat them differently, should we spend more time on them or less time on them, etc. We see that they're less loyal than the other ages, yet they are spending money on these different services. My personal opinion is that it's definitely a customer segment that needs to be looked at and considered and treated differently in some cases at least. If we continue now, and this kind of ties to, I think, some of the discussion in the previous presentation, we asked customers around, do you connect mostly via Wi-Fi or do you have a mobile internet plan? And you can see here the global results were about 60-40%. So 60% of customers said, yes, I have a mobile internet plan, compared to 40% of customers who said they don't. Again, obviously big differences in terms of countries. So, in the Western countries, in the developed countries, this number was actually, higher. With more people having a mobile internet plan, yet in some of the Eastern European countries and many of the APAC countries, we see less people with mobile internet plans. So this was kind of the first question. Then we asked them, okay, so for those people who actually have a mobile internet plan, what form of connection do you use the most? And you can see that only 30% of the people who have a mobile internet plan said that they actually use mobile internet the most. And you can see that Wi-Fi was much greater than the mobile internet plan. So it's even for people who have mobile internet, they use Wi-Fi more, and it could be Wi-Fi in public places, or Wi-Fi at home, or Wi-Fi at work. And again, this kind of varied between ages and between countries, etc. But definitely, Wi-Fi is being used more than mobile internet. Now, if we looked at it a few years ago, we would see that service providers were kind of trying to, push some customers to use Wi-Fi and offload to Wi-Fi networks, mostly because of the capacity crunch and, the congestion on the existing mobile networks. Yet we see today that it kind of, we passed a few phases since then, and we see that customers today just, prefer using Wi-Fi in many of the cases. When we took this even a level deeper and we tried asking customers, what is it that you like to do on Wi-Fi versus what is it that you like to do on mobile internet? I'm sure you can't see all the little writing there. But a few interesting criteria that kind of came about in terms of how customers decide which network to use. One is obviously the low data, heavy data. Anything that's heavy data, so like the ones here, which is TV programs, short videos, long videos, etc. People prefer doing heavy data. People prefer doing on the Wi-Fi networks. Not surprising. I mean, part of it is obviously the data buckets, which people don't want to use up on some of these heavy data applications. But it's not just the data buckets, because even customers who said that they have unlimited plans also said that when they watch a video, they switch over to Wi-Fi. So a big part of that is also the network quality. So it's kind of between price and network quality, kind of the balance. On top of that, we also see that there's the aspect of mobility, which again, not surprising. We see here that applications like searching for coupons, sending emails, things like that, which you kind of do, on the go. It's not that you're sitting down necessarily in one place, and it's more on the go. People tend to use mobile internet. Yet things like watching a video, which you would probably do, sitting down, whether it's in a restaurant or whether it's on a train or whether it's at home, whatever, the form, wherever the place is, but it's less mobility aspect, people tend to do on Wi-Fi because you can connect to the Wi-Fi network. and do these type of uses in one place over a Wi-Fi network. So you see that there's a question of how much data this is. You see the price, the network quality, and the mobility aspect. And these here are the global numbers, but this was pretty much the same in all countries. Obviously, the percentages weren't exactly the same in every country, but we kind of got the same X with mostly the same different uses in all countries. So then we asked customers, assuming you had an option to switch your current plan, your mobile plan, what would really be the main factors, or what type of plan would you want to switch to? So obviously lower prices was the #1 answer, not surprising. I mean, we would expect kind of that. If someone else gives me something at a lower price, I would consider switching over to that. Then if we look at some of the other answers, it kind of ties to some of the topics we discussed earlier. First one is the shared plan. So, I mean, we've seen that obviously in AT&T and Verizon, and now in more and more of the European providers as well, and we kind of touched that earlier with the Orange example as well. But shared plans, so it could be shared across devices, it could be shared across family members. This is something that consumers are looking for, and you see that clearly from the answers that this is something that they want, not siloed different data for different devices or different family members. I want the bigger bucket, and I want to be able to split that up between my specific needs. The second answer was really all about a bundle. So again, I don't necessarily want just the mobile service, but give me a bigger communication bundle. Might include home, internet, broadband, TV, etc. This is something that I would be looking for. Fourth reason here. Is a plan that enables me to choose the bundle components. So I don't just want a fixed bundle that I get from the service provider. I want to play around with the different components and be able to get a plan which is tailored to my needs based on how I want it. And this is also tied to the last answer here, which is plan that bills me based on my usage history. So again, it's something that is based on, it's all about the tailoring, the personalization, based on my specific usage history and what I've done, and this is probably what I'm going to do in the future. So let me kind of build that based on my specific needs. Okay, so sorry. I think this is the last question from the survey, and this really talks about our omni-channel or any channel question here. We asked customers here, and this also is a comparison between communication service providers and other industries. So we asked customers to rate their experience in the different channels. And we asked them to rate it once for communication services, and that's the orange circles, and the second time on other industries, and that's the green squares. And when we said other industries, we told them we're talking about retail and banking and airlines, and I think there were a few other examples there. So you can see very clearly in terms of store and call center, service providers in general, communication service providers are doing not so bad. They're doing better than many of the other industries. And what clearly came about there was that customers like the fact that they call the call center or they walk into the store and the agent has a lot of information about them and know what kind of products they have and what type of price plan they have, etc. So they like kind of the personal touch there. However, when we look at the website and the mobile app, we see that things kind of switch around. We see that the other industries are doing much better than the communication service providers. So a few conclusions from this. First of all, if we talked about consistency and omni-channel, etc., we see that definitely today consumers say that they're getting a very different experience across the different channels. In the stores and call centers, we're in the 50s and 60s, while in the website and mobile app, it moves down to 29 and 17. So definitely not a consistent experience for consumers in terms of the different channels. What we also see is that on the website and the mobile app, definitely service providers, communication service providers have a big opportunity. Their customers are already using some of these different channels. So it's not that they have to teach them to use this channel, yet right now they're just not doing such a good job in terms of giving the customers the experience that they're looking for, which these customers, as we said before, are getting from other industries, and this is kind of the comparison these days. So a few examples here. I guess I don't have too much time to go through these examples, and we kind of touched some of them. But some of the comparisons on things that are happening in other industries and comparing them to things that are happening in the communication service providers world. So scanning here. We see this is Tesco actually, which to everyone probably looks like a regular supermarket, but this is Tesco in South Korea, and this is actually a subway station, a train station, where they have a virtual store. So when people actually wait for their train, they can actually do their shopping while by scanning their device and have it delivered either when they get home or the next day, but it's kind of not to waste time by just waiting for a train. And we see that this is an example of Vodafone. I think this is in Qatar, if I'm not mistaken. They started doing this outside their stores. So when the store is closed, you can actually come and you can scan and get information and even order and pick it up later, etc. So kind of different things that are happening in other industries are happening in service providers' world as well. And we talked about the in-store pickup, the online shopping and in-store pickup. And in the previous presentation, we even heard the quote from around John Lewis. So I won't go through that. Self-service, lots of things obviously happening. We kind of touched some of those examples before, but again, the Starbucks application where I can order my drink. It remembers, obviously, what type of drink I want. I have the mobile wallet there as well, so it can. I don't actually have to pay. It can order the drink itself. So when I go into the store, into the Starbucks store, it's already waiting for me. It will tell me what's the closest location, etc. Lots of things, happening on this application. And, a couple of examples on self-service applications, mobile applications from service providers, which, there are lots and lots of examples we can look at here. So I guess I'll just finish off. We won't go through this. Let me just then kind of summarize it all with, this. So we in Amdocs, we talk about the new world of customer experience, and we say that there are four main pillars, really, that are under this new world of customer experience messaging. And this is very specific to service providers, obviously. So we talk about exciting your customers, finding the new revenue generators, the IoT, the mobile financial services, etc., looking for these services that would excite your customer. Intelligent, so this is all about the personalization. This is all about the customer interactions, the omni-channel, the self-service, etc. We talk about dynamic quality of experience, so it's all about the network solution. So obviously we saw before how important the network is in the customer experience story. So, you can't really ignore the network, obviously. And last but not least is kind of, perhaps the most boring one, which we've been talking about in the industry for a long time, but still very, very relevant, all about cost efficiencies, cost cutting, time to market, optimization, etc. And again, it's just something that you can't, really ignore, and it's all about accelerating the business value. So I'll stop here. Lots of material available on the Customer Experience Spotlight on our website. You can see the split between the different countries and some more questions which we didn't actually go through today. So I welcome everyone to go there. There's an interactive video you can play around with. So thank you very much.